Introduce. Well, everyone, thank you very much for joining us this evening or this afternoon or morning, wherever you are. I know we've got a nice globally distributed audience today. We are more than delighted to be joined by Fred Destin, who is one of the founders of Stride.VC, and quite frankly, particularly in the London scene of VC legend. We haven't really had the pleasure too much of having too many kind of more Web2 focused VCs. We've had Nick Grossman before, but this is, I think, allows the chance for some kind of unique insights. We're also delighted to say that Stride backed a project that came out of Encode, that some of you will be very familiar with, Footium, the football strategy game, which came out of the hackathons and accelerators. So that's one of the reasons we're doing this AMA today. But I guess say a few words about Fred. Fred is as I say, an extremely experienced VC, and experienced in the right way. He spent 10 years at Atlas from 2004 to 2014, before moving on to Accel from 2014 to 2017. In 2017, he founded Stride, which is just self-described as an artisan seed fund, particularly investing in the UK and France regions. I'm sure everyone will have lots of questions about the idiosyncrasies of seed investment, and particularly how that might apply to crypto. But he's been part of a number of some of the leading kind of startups that come out of these two regions I talked about, the likes of Zoopla, Deliveroo, Kazoo, and many, many others in between. Fred, we're so delighted to have you. Thank you very, very much for being here today. I must start with we always start with the same question, which is when you were at university, way back when, or not way back when, and what did you want to be, and how has that kind of played out compared to what your ambitions were at that stage of your life?
Well, so it's interesting. So today, like everybody wants to be an entrepreneur or VC. So I grew up in a family where my dad came from like a non-wealthy background. And, my mom lost her parents early. So it was all about security, like, and I'm from Belgium, and Belgium's very bourgeois. Now, actually, when I went to uni, I wanted to be an architect, and I'm passionate about architecture and design. But I ended up doing some kind of bullshit general business studies because I didn't really want to know what I wanted to do. And I thought I'd rather build my house than be paid a pittance to build houses for other people. So I clearly didn't feel that passionate about it. But I'm sort of I don't know, I'm a polymath. I've always thought there's 1,000 ways to live your life that are interesting, whether you're a gardener, an engineer, or a venture capitalist. And I think it took me 7 years to find my passion. But the moment I did, I knew what it was. And when I started doing venture investing, just literally there were no Mondays anymore. And for me, I think it's interesting. I never thought of applying creativity, even using the word creativity to business, but actually a lot of what I do is like try to help founders rethink through complex problems, or they're stuck on a strategy question, or trying to figure out how to modify the product to fit market. And actually you do apply a lot of creativity. And the piece for me that I like the most is sort of this: you take chaotic, complex situations and you try and come out with the right focus to derive simplicity out of complexity, and then to turn that into a product roadmap or organization building strategy, etc. And that's what I enjoy the most. That's where I get a kick. And so in a way, the venture capital stuff is like an excuse to do this with a lot of founders. And sure, I like investing. I have a decent nose for investing, but for me, the joy, like I ran a strategy session with one of our companies yesterday. And when you look for things that give you energy versus give things that take your energy away, when I come out of the room having spent time with 14 people running strategy workshops, etc., and I kind of leave and I'm like, wow, yeah, I feel powerful and happy, and kind of have a big smile on my face. So yeah, so I don't know. I don't believe in vocation. I believe in accidents and learning to recognize your feelings and follow your heart.
Fantastic. A lovely way to start the event. And I'm very pleased that people have already done my job for me, which is if you want to ask a live question, guys, which we very much encourage, please raise your hand. I'm going to get to you guys in a few minutes. Please raise your hand. You can also, if you're feeling a little bit shy, drop a question into chat, which I'll get to throughout the event. But Fred, kind of building on that, it's clear that the kind of passion you've had for the venture space. Has there been, and obviously you've founded your own things, has there ever been a kind of niggle to found your own tech startup? And have you ever found that kind of hindered you not to have gone through the specific process that your own founders have kind of gone through?
Yeah, so maybe I'm slightly weird animal in that sense. But first of all, have I thought about starting a company 100 times? And I've had the urge, and I've had 20 ideas. Okay, here's the thing I don't like to do particularly is manage people. And I mean, I love working with peers. That's like my jam, right? I'm not particularly passionate about building organizations and running people. So for me, being a small strategy lab, if you like, if you think of a venture firm that way, is great because we're typically partners or we're small teams. You know, it's very collegiate or family-like, and we tend to use our brains on different problems every day. So yes, I always had the urge. I've managed, so I'm passionate about operations, so organization design, how you scale, the alchemy of teams, you know, how people interact with each other, setting priorities. I mean, all that stuff that's kind of at the heart of company building really gets me going. So I think I've kind of managed to compensate over time just by listening a lot, asking questions, learning, and you know, so I feel quite good actually as a sounding board for an operator. But you know, it came through experience and being humble. And at the beginning, I was super verticalized. You know, there's some sectors I knew a lot about, and then I could add value on like the go-to market for, you know, an IP services company way back in the day. And I was really good at that, right? So the founders would be like, hey, it's great because Fred has become a sector expert on this. And then gradually, as I gained maturity, I went wider. And then you find out at the end that it's, you know, most things are people issues. I always say defeat comes from within. You know, it's going to be like your relationship with your co-founder that screws you up, or you're getting a stupid investor who, you know, takes the joy out of your life by pounding you at the board, or it's going to be your inability to generate focus, an aligned focus and vision within your company. At some point, these are the issues that kind of lock you down. And so I think my job is I need to understand enough about the companies we're investing in to be relevant and to be close to the ground. And then I'm sort of watching at the meta level what's going on, and like, hey, you're missing a certain person in the field. Hey, you need to readjust your strategy. Hey, you need to plan your financing ahead of time, and what's the narrative we're going to use. So you kind of try and find these high impact inflection points that, you know, that founders, because they're in the day-to-day operation, may not be thinking about.
Absolutely. In fact, I've noticed, maybe this is true, maybe it's not. Obviously, Stride being a focus on seed, your association with Harry Stebbings, your hiring of the likes of Michelangelo, who I've got to know very well, and it's clear you have an eye and an ability to spot talent and back talent in whatever form, at extremely, no matter their age, quite frankly. So there must be some heuristics there, and I mean, not even qualitative heuristics you're employing to identify rock stars. What are these heuristics? And the instinctive ones more than anything.
I mean, so, okay, here's what I do with people. I start thinking together. And it's true with founders as well. So you kind of modulate your presence. You're meeting someone, say you meet a founder, because actually it's the same thing, right? You could be in a mode where they're selling, you're buying. Show me your pitch, you know, let's see what you've got to sell. Or you could get in a mode of like, hey, let's dynamically think about the problem you're trying to solve together. And we immediately get into reflection. So you'll see people who think fast on their feet. You'll see people who know how to engage you. You'll see people who are intellectually humble, curious, and powerful. And so I think that to me, it's kind of changing the code on the mode of engagement to quickly go into this kind of, hey, we're looking at the future together. You know, you kind of create an environment of trust where you'll see people deploy their best qualities without trying to sell you. And I think it's kind of cracking through that wall that allows you to assess people pretty quickly. And then, I mean, the case of Michelangelo is kind of interesting, right? Because it's like, I wanted to do a random research project, which we never did. And Michelangelo tells me, I don't want to do your research project, it's boring, but I can find people who can do it for you. You know, let me farm out the research project, you know. And I'm like, okay, great. And then he says, by the way, I have a podcast. It's called Almost Founders. You want to come on? And I'm always happy to go talk to people like aspiring to be founders, not because I want to find deal flow, but because I'm like, hey, if I can inspire more people to start companies, great. And then we do the podcast, and it was fantastic. And afterwards, I'm like, do you want to come work for us? I'm like, what's my job description? I said, your job description is to be chaos. I want you to come in. I want you to break everything. I want you to show stuff we don't see. I want you to go, because but I don't even know his age, but 24 or something. He's like, or 23. He's like, he'll be better placed to find out what the future looked like than I am, right? And then I can apply, so kind of mental models, etc., to make sure we think about the stuff in the right way. But he's the one who's more likely to find the next, so rare, not me, right? So I firmly believe in that, and I think you have to. Your talent doesn't wait for the years, right? In fact, when Harry and I started working together, he was 20, right? And I remember when I met him, we did the podcast. Again, podcast seems to be a theme in my life. And I'm like, Harry, you're not going. I was at Accel in our fancy offices with like leather covered walls. Not quite my gig, but I'm like, Harry, you're not going anywhere. So I kept him in the room. We got him sushi. And then I started going around the offices. I'm like, hey, Sonali, when do you have half an hour to meet this kid? And I get everybody to meet him. Everybody liked him. But then it was kind of a question of, oh, what job do we give him? Because he's just an associate, is he a principal? And I was like, no. He's talented. Let's just design something for him that works, right? And then, it kind of didn't work at the time, but we kept in touch. And I always thought Harry was a special talent. But then, by the way, you then have to sell this to institutional investors, pension funds and stuff. And they're like, you did what? You started a fund and you gave half the economics away to a 20-year-old? I'm like, well, yeah, he's great. What if he finds the next Skype or whatever, or the next king? He's going to be upset if he doesn't have economics. And so I think half the planet thought he was great, or 30%, and the other 70% thought I'd lost my mind.
Well, I think that particular investment has paid off remarkably, really, seeing Harry's trajectory ever since. So it might even be your most successful decision ever. Moving on to, I guess, continuing on the theme of precocious founders doing crazy things. There's obviously a skepticism towards crypto, always, particularly from quote unquote traditional VCs, and Stride is kind of making steps towards it. What is your reaction to crypto at the moment? And obviously, I suspect it was a skeptical one to begin with. And what is changing in your head? That quite simply.
So when I was at Accel, so back in 2014, we backed KNC Miner. And KNC Miner, I have to remember what architecture they were building on now, but I think we were building the world's first 14 nanometer chip with TSMC to be able to, 10x the power of crypto mining chip silicon. And so it's one of these, so went in super early. They had a data center in the north of Lapland in Sweden, and it was an old helicopter base. And so it's the first time I really saw utility computing in action, which is you get into this data center and everything's throwaway, right? Like if one of the power supplies fails, you throw it away. If one of the cards fails, you throw it away, and it's dusty. And so it looks like really like an industrial environment. And when the data center got too hot, they would lift the doors on the side, out of which they used to take the helicopters, because it's an old army base, so that the Arctic winds would come in and cool down naturally the stuff. So that was back in 2014. We got like unbelievably unlucky with that company. We had a mixture of the Chinese miners coming online, and we didn't know how they hit the price levels that they did, but they must have gotten the energy for free is our assumption, because they didn't have that great hardware. And we're like, how the heck are they mining so cost effectively? Then TSMC screwed up on the power calcs for the chips. And so our chips post-production were like sitting on the miners, and basically we'd lose about 30% of them to heat, and we couldn't overclock them. So there was something wrong with the power calcs. So then we had to do runarounds and try and water cool them, right? So they wouldn't actually burn. And it's that time, if you remember, where Bitcoin pricing dipped for quite a while. And so the company ended up going bust, probably on the eve of being worth 5 billion. It's one of these insane stories. But so I think for me, the point was, if you looked at the mining rewards and if you look at the quality of the underlying economy, etc., I was like, I never was a skeptic around it. I think where you became skeptical, and still should be today, is like every new gold rush. There are two primary issues for me. One is the people who are just, you know the game, right? So we're going to pump a community up, etc. We're going to run the coin, and let's hope we don't get eviscerated by the next community coming along who's going to pump their own coin. And this whole dynamic, which is real, by the way. That's not an invention. I mean, there are a number of people that are in there and understand precisely how to run the economics on a specific coin to kind of make themselves wealthy at the expense of everybody else, basically pass the bag down the line. So that's given the market a bad name. And then the other problem you have is jargon, right? Because so if you think about jargon in general, jargon is a way, like if you know the acronyms, you feel like you're an insider, right? Like, so jargon in every industry is a way to sort of not pretend, but it's a way to build an expertise that other people are kept out of. And in crypto, it's particularly strong, right? Like you have to stay on top of the constant advent of new protocols, etc. And so it's a game. So if you spend 15 hours a day on it, you're always going to be ahead of people who spend 3 hours a day on it. So your worst competition in a way are a bunch of 17-year-olds who are not going to school and they're working on crypto all day long collectively, right? Like that's a competition that's really hard to beat. And so I think it's basically the Far West mentality has its good side and its bad side. I have seen a bunch of projects. So I'll take an example of a staker coin. So if the startup comes up and they say, oh, we have a retail saving opportunity, right? And it's based on staking. And I look at it and I'm like, okay, cool. And so we're paying 15% or whatever they're paying. I think they were paying 45% at the beginning and the yields were dropping. And, you ask them, it's like, well, it's basically because people are staking for 10 years. It was like, well, okay, but you can't generate yield out of absolutely nothing. And it was just quite a smart guy, but that's an example of, the staking in itself does not generate value. For you to go sell that as a retail saving product that pays 7 times more than you're able to do in the real economy, and you don't have an underlying asset like an exciting NFT or whatever it is, okay, that is unlikely to work. That is also likely to blow up in the face of the people who come late into the game, who are basically retail savers, i.e. your grandma. So that part of it, I think there are genuine reasons why people would be concerned. And then you also have the naysayers. I mean, I was at a friend's house the other day and he's like, hey, what about these NFTs, and I like to have art on my wall. I'm like, well, if your wall's virtual and you can step into the art and it's actually, a psychedelics enhanced experience of, that's infinite and that morphs and that's your NFT, like, wouldn't that be cool? And he just couldn't get it, right? So there's a whole population group that like are attached to physical assets and, they'll be the late adopters. But I think you're basically seeing the beauty, the good, the bad, and the ugly of human nature being expressed in crypto today. And, if you're not an insider, a lot of people feel like if they're not insiders, they're going to get creamed, right? So it's an insider's game. It's a jargon-based game. It's a fast-moving game, and that's why it's so exciting. And that's why I'm sure all of you are here, because you feel like you're writing the future. But there's going to be a lot of blood on the walls, right? Like with every new wave of innovation.
Fantastic. Right. Let's get to some of the many questions that people have got their hands up. Jerry, we're going to go to you first. Jerry is leads a blockchain club in America, Spartan. So Jerry, over to you, sir.
Awesome. Thank you, Anthony. Yeah, my name is Jerry. I am out here in the US. I lead a blockchain student organization at Michigan State University. So we're very happy to participate in this AMA and hear about how venture capitalist funds are dipping into crypto. My main question here is, given the nature of startups and crypto, like new crypto projects and protocols in general, what are some things VC funds like yours look for that indicate a project will actually succeed and isn't just a blank roadmap?
Yeah, so look, I think investing in a white paper by itself is tough. And so in our case, because we're not obsessed about like moving wholesale into crypto. When we backed Futium, it's a football game, and the value of the NFT is related to clubs, and you get it, right? So there's a natural economy, there's a skills-based aspect to it, there's a pay-to-earn aspect to it, and so a lot of the game mechanics that are present in there are great. If you look at Futures Factory, so Satoshi Labs, it's a company that basically is a mixture of producing physical sneakers and virtual sneakers. and fully blockchain enabled. And so that's one that actually bridges over, interestingly, between the physical and the virtual. But again, you're kind of building on people's love of sneakers, and whether that's in the real world or the metaverse, like who cares? So we've been just looking for natural use cases that kind of make sense, which means we're not cutting edge taking view on coins. In fact, for us, from a regulation standpoint, we really have to watch speculating on currencies. And so it's not just that we don't want to, is that we have to watch that we're actually allowed to, right? So, and our first fund, I mean, that was our first fund, so painful. We were regulated in Luxembourg, and the Luxembourg regulator came out and said, venture funds cannot invest in blockchain, period, like blanket. And we're like, really? So we moved Fund 2 to the UK, so that, in part because it opens up the blockchain environment, but it was just so stupid that, they were so afraid of the sector in general that they blocked all of it. Now, the other thing we have to think about, so there is a whole infrastructure required to be able to hold the assets themselves, because, Futum, for example, we're going to end up holding tokens. And so there's some stuff you don't think about, but we need insurance, for example, against holding assets, right? And then our insurance provider goes like, oh, we don't know how to deal with crypto. And these are all things that are required by the regulator again. So there's a whole set of things you need to do on the infrastructure side to be able to play the game, which are not all trivial. And then even more interestingly than that, it's like, okay, well, if we're going to fold into token, it's like, how do we value, because typically we like to come in at a certain price and then, exit at another price. It's like, well, okay, so how do we value the company? It gets even worse when you talk about DAOs, right? Like if you're going to flip yourself into a DAO, it's like, okay, so what do I own as an asset? So it's not that easy actually for funds to cross over between the two seamlessly, which is why I think the dedicated crypto funds, which by the way have been killing it in terms of returns, right? But they're perfectly comfortable kind of folding into tokens, etc., and because their entire portfolio is composed of it. So I think that's why you're seeing this migration is happening at a steady pace. I think most venture capitalists, well, many venture capitalists recognize that as a 25 to 30-year trend. I mean, that's already started 7-8 years ago. This is the most fundamental innovation since HTTP or HTML, whichever one you want to choose, but since the web, right? And so I think that's not in question. I think people are, to a certain extent, some people are not stressing because they're waiting for more of these scenarios that are really integrated with the real world. Like if you look at Helios in the US, okay, so that's cool. So now we're building a mesh. I think it basically is a mesh wireless network for devices, right? So you can tag your dog and you can tag whatever you want, and then they'll put a router in your house and you get a coin. It's like, okay, well, that's really cool because people have tried to do this multiple times, but now you actually have a coin attached to your participation in the wireless mesh network. So, okay, so that's really interesting for me as a bridge over use case. And also, by the way, if you're the user, you don't need to know anything about crypto really, right? Except have a wallet and be able to hold a token. But from an end user standpoint, now you can bring this into the mass market because they don't need to know what the underlying protocol is. They don't need to know if the code's secure. That it's just a consumer product. The next question will be, well, to what extent so I've seen a crypto project for every single industry case you can think of. It's like clinical trials, verifying identity at airports. I mean, it's like everything's got a blockchain project attached. So in those, you have the question of, okay, you have these industry monsters that are on 5 to 10 year, software changeover cycles. So you kind of have to sell into that. And then again, back to that problem I mentioned earlier, which is how do we interface with the real world? How do we get out of the 3-letter acronym hell that is crypto to a certain extent to the outside observer, to bring things that are easier to adopt for corporations, for end users, for things like that. So that's kind of in general the interface problem of crypto, which if you're inside it, you'll have a tendency to perpetuate that because you're like, well, this is great because you have to be an insider to understand crypto, right? So there's a certain fascination with keeping it really complex. But if you think about broad-based adoption, that's what it's going to take. And so the people are able to articulate the benefits of crypto to wider markets are going to build massive companies.
Awesome. Jerry, great question. Thank you very much. Oren, we're going to go to you next. Oren is taking part in our Filecoin Accelerator. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Hey, Fred, my name is Oren, and I'm the founder of Question. It's a blockchain-enabled market research portal where users answer questions and they earn credits for these questions that they've answered. When looking for an investor, do you have any tips or ideal qualities or attributes? Of course, someone with capital, expertise in the field, and a personal connection ideally, but is there anything more we should be looking for? I've been approached by a couple firms and they all offer money. So it seems as if money shouldn't even be your biggest consideration when trying to get investment. So that's my first question. And my second question is basically, what personally excites you in Web3 and blockchain? You've kind of talked about consumer products that are blockchain under the hood, and the consumer doesn't really know about the technology, but getting the benefits of it. Could you talk a little bit more about that and what you see in the coming trend? Thank you.
So for your first question, I think if you think about a 7 to 10 year journey, typically your main investors are not people you can fire. So it's kind of worse than your co-founder, right? So I think the number one quality you're looking for is actually somebody you can trust and somebody who's got your back. Because the normal state of functioning of any startup is chaos and being near death, right? It's like, and you'd be surprised even later stage companies go near death again. And so the thing is, if you find investors who are comfortable with that, they don't bring their fear or their anger or their frustration to you, they kind of help you find solutions. I think that quality is probably the number one thing you look for. The second thing I think is really knowledge or understanding of your business, because having an investor who doesn't understand what you do or understand it superficially can be really freaking painful, because then they're like, well, why haven't you hit that product milestone yet? And you're like, well, the engineering around this is really complicated. Or why haven't you hit revenues at that level yet? And if they're not close to the business, it's going to become adversarial very quickly, because you'll have information asymmetry and they'll think you're hiding something from them. And you'll be like, these guys are idiots. Which sometimes they are, by the way. So I think domain knowledge is next. But if you have trust and domain knowledge, you're in good shape. Then you start looking at the rest. Do they have an amazing brand? Brands do help, because great brands tend to attract more great brands further on. Is there a specific value add that they can bring? I wouldn't. I'm a bit of a cynic. I think like I said, value add matters less than relationship. If you have someone you can call late at night when shit is really going wrong, and you go like, what the fuck do I do? And that conversation is meaningful, you're doing well. For the rest, VC is a fairly undifferentiated product from the inside, so everybody tells the same story. So I think, the harder you look for founder references, etc., like don't get married too fast. It's really worth doing the research, because some people are just awful. And venture is a market where, if you think about it, you have limited accountability. So everybody who's trying to raise money from you, so you think you're special. If you show up at the board and you haven't done the work, you're not going to get fired. If you are bad at your job, it's unlikely your founders are going to tell you, because you might need money from them again. So it's like, it kind of produces these overinflated egos, right? So you have two types of VCs. You have VCs that, as more the career go, the more overinflated their egos go, and people get more and more humble, because they're like, oh shit, this is really hard and I don't know anything. And you see them bifurcating. So anyway, so I think VCs are a difficult breed, but there are talented people. I've worked with some phenomenal people. I think trust your gut, and like, do they fundamentally understand what we do? And are they freaking smart? Or are they just following crypto trend? Your project is easy, quote unquote, because it's like, okay, this is a very logical example of monetization. It's a play to earn, right? It's a very logical example of monetization against an effort being provided. So a lot of people are going to go like, oh, great, finally, an example of crypto that I can get my head around, right? So I think you might find people with interest that way, but then, okay, dig deeper. How do we build? I guess if you're building a research product, so okay, where are we going to find these contributors at scale? I mean, that's not a crypto problem. I mean, it is to a certain extent, but it's not really a crypto problem, right? So kind of, okay, let's get into that. What are the levers here that we can use to kind of go scale this business to make it sustainable? Because you give people a token, or a coin, they're like, okay, great, but that's not going to make them come back necessarily, because they'll be in their wallet, they'll forget about it. So it's like, what are the mechanics of engagement over time? Okay, so if you can have these conversations relatively intelligently with people, then I think you're in good shape. So on trends, I'm going to give you a non-answer on purpose. So I don't think my job is to find the themes. And in fact, I would say the reason why I'm answering the question that way is we do this on purpose. There is nothing more boring than asking your VC what the big themes are, because we all say the same shit. So our job is to be mentally plastic, so that when founders come with uses of crypto that are surprising and unexpected, we're like a blank slate. We're like, hey, great. What's the use case? How does it work? And so we try and be as mentally plastic as we can. And we're constantly surprised, which is why I don't want to go that trend. We don't invest in trends. We invest in people and projects. And we're constantly surprised by the stuff people come up with.
Thank you so much.
You bet.
Thank you very much, Oren. Let's go to Ryan. Over to you, sir.
Hey. My name is Ryan. I represent the Rowan University Blockchain Studies Club. We are located in New Jersey, but we're very close to Philadelphia. So my question for you is about the trends of innovation and technology. So that's mainly what we study in our club. We don't really study too much about individual cryptocurrency prices, but I'm curious how you perceive these trends of technology and innovation. And maybe in the last 2 years since COVID began, how have you seen the trends change? And how does that affect your behavior?
This is a heavy macro question, and I'm not a futurist. What I do is I try to look for unique insights being developed by founders about the markets that they attack. And ideally, actually, while they're going to leverage macro trends, they're not necessarily on trend, because if they're on trend, that means everybody else is funding the same stuff. Now, look, COVID in the UK, for example, has led to an absolutely massive acceleration of digital adoption in just about every industry. So it's been a huge driver of adoption. So we have a lot more population online, a lot of which is less equipped than the early adopters to deal with complexity, right? So in other words, the 65-year-old who now buys all their stuff online, and kind of, okay, so how do you serve these non-technology native population groups is one question. There is the remote work, right? It drives absolutely a gazillion things in what we do. So you look at the nature of work has changed. It's asynchronous, it's distributed, and that drives a bunch of things. And so you can see, well, okay, so I can of course separate providing doctor services from the actual patient, but that applies to just about everything. So you look at that as the sort of decoupling of the physical from the digital, and apply that to just about every industry, every country, and that creates a lot of avenues. And of course, the metaverse, is the ultimate instantiation of that, which is like, okay, now we're fully untethered from the physical world. But again, I don't know how to answer your question. My job, I'm sorry, I'm not a futurist. I mean, I read stuff all the time, but I don't typically try and abstract trends too much. What I try and do is listen to founders who come in and say, here's something you haven't seen. Here's something that's not in the MIT technology review, but that we've identified by talking to users or by digging deep into science or stuff like that. And then computational genomics and quantum computing, and quantum computing in the UK is coming of age. That is happening. That will change the face of crypto. That'll change, crypto in terms of cybersecurity is what I meant, cryptography. That's going to revolutionize a bunch of stuff. And so you can see those happening, but it's kind of not my job to over-index on that. You should talk to Azim Azari, he's a great futurist. So I'm sorry for half-assing your question, but not really my gig.
Thank you very much for the question, Ryan. Lots of hands up, 10 hands up. Let's see if we can crack through these. Fede, who is in Argentina. Fede, over to you, sir.
Hey, Anthony, thank you. Yep, as Anthony said, I'm a software developer here in Argentina, working for JP Morgan. I recently quit my job to dedicate my life to crypto, and I want to transition into Web3. And Fred, thank you very much for your input in the crypto space. I really agree with everything you've said. And my question would be, what would, like, if you were looking for a job in a crypto space, right? With all these companies, as you said, there will be a lot of blood in the walls and projects that won't succeed. What would you look in a company, in the people hiring you to get a job? Yeah.
Okay, so let me first ask you a question. When you said I wanted to change my life to join the crypto space, what was it that you were looking for? I mean, you made that statement, it's quite a striking statement. What was it that you were looking for?
Well, I've been in crypto since 2017, and I'm super passionate about the technology. And as you said, I'm crazy about these new projects that people come up. So I would like to participate in something like that. That's my objective. Build something
Gotcha.
super cool. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so VCs. So if you look at me, right, I'm going to look at 100 companies and invest in one. So in other words, I perfect what's known as the art of the pick. I get to talk to a lot of people. I get to think about a lot of problems. Yeah. And then at some point I write a check. Maybe it's 1 in 50, maybe it's 1 in 100. I don't know what the math are. But I have perfected the art of the pick because I see so much. Typically, when you're looking for a job, you don't see that much because you're going to be talking to a few people. A friend might introduce you to some guy. And then, you know what? Human nature is such that you're going to feel compelled to kind of get engaged, and maybe somebody makes you an offer and then you're like, okay, well, I'm going to join. And your emotional side kind of takes over because you're happy you get a job and you feel flattered, and maybe you feel stressed because you don't have cash or whatever reason. So you take the job. So if you think about it, the key is to perfect the art of the pick. So you could literally write out and you say, do I care about the mission? What kind of culture am I happy working in? The best advice I can give you is only work for exceptional founders to the extent possible. Really exceptional founders, because if you're alongside these kinds of people, it almost doesn't matter what they do because you're just going to be learning so much and it's going to be so much fun. So I think I would vastly over-index on people, and then I would take my time. So you say, where should I work? Well, ask the same questions I would ask. Like, okay, what's the insight you've developed? What is it that you're solving? Is the problem interesting? Is the problem big enough to be really interesting? Number one. Number two, do I understand exactly why people are adopting this? Is there a logical, compelling reason why people are, whatever it is, buying the asset or engaging in the community or playing the game? Then you go into feasibility. Do I believe that there is a credible path towards building a sustainable company? And I think you ask those questions in the cold light of day, and you'll find that, a lot of crypto, because everybody wants to get into crypto. Ex-bankers want to get into crypto to do real estate, and they have absolutely no domain expertise whatsoever. We see, it's such a gold rush that you just have to be disciplined, systematic, and if you can find a way to not have to spend too much money or to be able to take your time, don't rush. Because picking companies is something you're going to do, maybe 5 times in your life, or maybe 10 times, but more likely 5 or 6 times, right? So this is a very important choice. It's like buying a house. So are you spending the same amount of energy, research as you would on buying a house? Or are you feeling anxious? Shit, I got to get a job. Let me get interviews. Let me go work somewhere. It's like, take a step back, think like an investor, have a framework, be disciplined.
Okay, thank you very much.
And also you can work remote these days if you feel like it. So you can also go hunt globally.
Yep, that's the idea. I agree 100% with what you say. Thank you very much.
And then last thing, if you don't want to boil the ocean, I think it's good for you to say, okay, what themes do I care about? Because, you can map yourself the world of crypto and go, these applications of crypto or these areas of Web3 are of interest to me. I'm going to start mapping the companies out, and then I'm going to do outreach. And when you do outreach, the key is to be personalized. You say, hey, Fede, I saw that you started this company. You went to that uni, so did my brother, or whatever it is. You find commonality and you spend a little bit of time personalizing, and you just go approach people. Or you maybe more interestingly, you approach them with unique insights about what it is they're building. Hey, I love the way you've deployed the product. here are some observations I had, I'd love to come work for you, that kind of stuff, right? So you personalize it and you demonstrate value immediately, and then you get a much better shot at making it.
Perfect. That sounds great. Thank you.
All right, man. Good
Awesome
luck.
question. Awesome question, Fede. And if anyone does need any help with getting a job in crypto, Laura, our wonderful head of talent, is always happy to help with that process. Awesome. Right. I think let's try and take 2 questions at a time because we have a lot to get through. So I'm going to try and go Sean and Jamie, and then we'll see if we can, at least I'll keep them in my brain, and we'll run through them. So Jamie, do you want to go first with your questions, sir?
Sure. Thanks very much for your time. I was just wondering, because a lot of tech startups are cash flow negative, have to take on quite a lot of debt or have to attract a lot of investors. But this year, a lot of central banks have said that they're going to increase rates, which means that it's going to be a lot more expensive to take on debt, or it might be a bit harder to get investors. Are you personally worried about the increasing interest rate and its effect on any tech startups that you're invested in, or just generally the London ecosystem of tech startups?
Interest rates at a macro level are going to crater the equities market, right? That's already happened because cost of borrowing for corporates goes up. Startups hardly ever rely on debt, so they don't really have a direct impact. And I don't think a rise in interest rate per se is particularly concerning. Now, what's happened this year is, look, we have the Ukraine war, we have massive slashing of values in the public market. So a lot of people are going to be sitting on their cash. So you can for sure assume that investments are going to slow down. At the same time, there is a massive wall of cash that's been coming into tech, startups, etc., for many years because people were looking for yield. And, it's not that obvious where they get the kind of return opportunities that we can offer. And it's also become extremely mainstream to go and invest in startups. So I think in general, we're in a pretty good spot. Now that equities are cheaper, there might be more money going back into equities. Now that interest rates are higher, there might be more attractive yields in interest rates. So all that would take money out of the system. But I think the macro trend is, oh my God, there's a wall of cash of people who want to be involved in the future, and way more than in the past. Family offices, wealthy individuals, ex-bankers. And so I'm pretty confident. And I think the London ecosystem at the moment is overheating. When you look at the war for talent, the salaries, etc., it's insane. So I don't think we have that kind of problem today, quite the opposite.
That's great.
Awesome question, Jamie. Thank you very much. Sean, over to you.
Hi, Fred. I believe you were introduced as a Titan in the London VC game.
Not by me.
Well. So as in the last few years, remote work has really taken off. Crypto companies are increasingly not domiciled anywhere. So it seems like geography is less important in the startup game. How do you think these trends have changed startup investing?
It's a good question, which is, to what extent are physical clusters like London, Paris, Berlin, Silicon Valley still important? And to what extent is everything becoming distributed? And, the pendulum swing, went very far out and it's coming back. And so I think the answer is all of the above. So what I mean by that is we know technology is eating the world. It's attacking every sector. Then you have the Web3 revolution on top. And so if anything, the importance of what we do, building startups, is increasing because in a way, we're like the highly evolving organism that can attack new industries very fast. So our main competitive advantage against any kind of incumbent, if you're going into an established industry, is just your rate of adaptation. And startups are like viruses, right? And that's why they're very hard to compete against. And we see, look, when I started, it was like, okay, so we'll do music. So we do music piracy, Napster, and then we'll do digital music, and then we'll do. So it started with digital assets. Then we moved into things where you could build booking engines like travel, etc., and then movie tickets. And then suddenly, recent years, we got, we're actually going to move atoms around. So we get into food delivery and version 1 was ordering online, and version 2 is like get it delivered to your house, and it's full stack marketplaces like Deliveroo. And now we've attacked all these big categories of e-commerce. So like Kazoo, now you can buy a secondhand car online. Okay, so and now we're moving into pharma and agriculture and industrial environments, etc. And all of these are getting attacked by software. Like, so that's the macro wave. That's sort of taking everything by storm. Now within that, you have the phenomenon of future of work and distribution. And I'm seeing all sorts. I'm seeing people who go hybrid. I'm seeing people go fully distributed. I'm seeing people who believe in physical co-location. And very often it kind of depends on the type of business they are. You know, super engineering centric, very product centric, highly distributed versus environments that are more sales driven, etc. Where typically they like to be closer together because they need a emulation between salespeople and marketing to be close to sales. And, you know, there's a lot of value in the informal interaction. So yeah, it's changing the game. How it's impacted us in practice is our Fund 2 portfolio is way more distributed than Fund 1. We have Romania and 2 in Spain and 1 in Sweden. And whereas Fund 1 was all very London. And when I say we have 1 in London, like Impala is 80% distributed, so I don't even know where they are. So yeah, it's a good question. It's exciting, right? Like the world's opening up. I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. Your clusters like London remain powerful in reality because capital, creativity, engineering talent, universities, and it's a long-term wave, that wave of distribution. So it's impacting, it's like seeping in, but it's not an overnight change. And also the future is never as binary as people think. You know, people say, oh, whatever, the music industry is going to die, you know, the labels are going to die. And then, you know, these pronouncements are always wrong because they do evolve and the change is never as dramatic. And so the reality is usually somewhere in the middle.
Sean, excellent question, especially broaching crypto and non-crypto there. Well done. Right, Ankit, let's take your question. You're waiting patiently. Let's go to you, sir.
Hey, Fred. Yeah,
Ankit.
so I'm actually part of the Filecoin accelerator that's going on right now. And so what we're building is essentially like NFTs from clips that streamers make, and then they can sell it to their fans, which can act as a social currency. So since we're just starting out on our whole startup thing, so my question to you is, when would you consider is the right time to approach investors?
Okay, the short answer to that is, well, it depends what kind of investors. The short answer to that is always,
Right.
which is the reason why. And I mean, of course, you don't want to dilute your time too much by going formally fundraising. So I'm going to give you a slightly philosophical answer and then a real answer. So
Right.
the short answer is always. In other words, when you get an opportunity to go meet someone, do it, because then you don't have a cold start problem. You can go fundraise. In your case, you know, it's going to be the classic, okay, who's willing to invest on pure vision?
Right.
Okay, so there's a group of actors who are quite happy to invest purely on people and vision. The pre-seed funds, angels, usually it depends which community you're from and whether there's money around you. There may or may not be. If you have people around you, your old boss, etc., anybody who's like got social currency close to you can give you some money. That's a good start. And then you go one level out and you go see a pre-seed fund and you say, oh, you know, my old boss gave me invested, even if he gave you $5,000, you know,
Right.
or $1,000. But you say my old boss invested in my company. Okay, well, that's social currency. Then you go to that pre-seed fund and they give you $200,000, and you say, well, that's great. I've got the Filecoin accelerator funds invested, and then you build like concentric circles of trust. And so there's a group of people that will just back you on people and vision alone, and you can raise, you know, 250 to 500K, and if you're really amazing, your team's amazing, maybe even more, right? Then you sit down and you say, okay, what's the key thing I'm trying to prove? Because there's no singular answer. Like if I'm trying to think about what is the next most useful step that I can take to prove the viability of my business. So in your case, it may be the distribution you got to crack. So I'm going to get 5 or 6 creators on here. I don't know how, I haven't thought about the dynamics of your business, but you know, do you need to get a lot of creators and users at the same time? Can you afford to go with a set of high value creators and start distribution with them? In which case your test case might be, hey, let me get 5 high value creators who produce regularly, and and kind of sell for coin, and users start coming in. So now you get a use case that says creators like this, they're able to produce, and the coins are getting shipped. It's like, okay, cool. So that may be enough to unlock the next million. Then there's a population of funds, including me and Kindred and all that stuff, and Fabric and so forth. They'll be like, they'll do rounds of anywhere from 1 to like 5 million. So that's the target group. And it's a fucking thankless task. And it takes a long time, and I think you have to constantly be building a list of targets, a pipeline. It's something that should be part of your regular activity, because otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to be working. Then you raise your head and you go, I need cash. And then you don't know where to start.
You don't have contacts at that moment.
And then it's a panic, right? And also money comes very often as an outcome of the work you do. So what I've seen plenty of times is founders, they push project to a certain level, and then they say, I need money. And then they get upset. They're like, this is not giving me money. I can't build my business. And then you kind of get into a spiral that can be a bit dispiriting. So it's much better to put yourself in the mindset of saying, I don't know when I'm going to get money. I'm not going to drive my cost base. I'm going to keep working from mom's home, whatever, so that I'm super sustainable, and I'm going to keep doing the work. And then I'm going to talk to people. And at some point, somebody's going to say, this is really cool. Can I write you a check? And the thing will come together. As long as you keep moving the business forward and don't put yourself in this mindset of, if I can't get over that wall of having raised cash, I'm not building it. Now, ideally, you'll get the money in time, but it's important to always keep the ball moving down the field, always make progress on the business.
Right. Got it. Thanks a lot, Fred.
All right, yep.
Awesome. I think we might have time for one very quick question. Let's go, Scott. Scott, you have the honor of the last one.
Thank you so much. This was great. I guess my question is, let's say you're a solo founder, or you're at a stage where you kind of have a garage thing going on, but you think it's got potential, and you're trying to build it out, basically. So you're not going in on just an idea, but at what point do you start to take it to a larger audience? Like, should you always, in that case as well, be seeking VC, or do you kind of want to be proving it first? And is there a road where it really is successful and it doesn't involve VC at all? And is that preferable?
What's your project?
It's a game.
Okay. Look, I think in most cases, to answer your last questions first, in most cases, if I didn't have to raise for VC, I'm not sure I would. There are some benefits to having someone like me, which is there is a certain cadence that comes with like, hey, where are we? Where do we need to go next? Who do we need to hire? And having someone who's kind of working with you, and also in a way, even if I don't mean to do this formally, but kind of holding you accountable. I think there's a certain cadence. If you need a lot of cash, you need venture capital. So that's the problem. If you don't need venture capital, I'm not sure that I would want to give away a portion of my company to someone who has rights, sits on my boards, and kind of can tell me what breakfast to have, which I don't do, but technically people can do. Okay, when do you take it to a larger audience? Look, my view is build in public, talk about it as much as you can. Ideas are cheap, execution is king. And so the more open you are with your project, the more likely you are to find talent, investors, supporters, a support network, advisors, etc. So I have a tendency to say, go open quickly. Solo founder is tough. And the reason why it's tough is because the first test of building a company is, can you attract a second person? Because we need some rules, right? Because otherwise, somebody with an idea is like, it's kind of tough, right? And so one of the simple tests, there are solo founder companies with backed, by the way, I'm just saying it's harder, because one of the simple tests you apply is you say, was that person able to attract the second person, without cash? And do they get along well? So, because that gives you a lot of stuff. That gives you, are they good at recruiting or attracting talent? Are they good at interacting with someone early? And more importantly, do we have more depth in the team, and are we mixing expertise? So I think for my money, I think finding co-founders is probably, kind of feels like task number one.
How to find co-founders? I'm sorry. Do you have anything on that?
I mean, I've had people apply a scientific method to the type of profile they wanted within their community and going to meet everybody. What I would say is, if you're looking for a co-founder who's a technical co-founder or a game designer or whatever it may be, having one interview this week is better than zero. Having 3 meetings this week is better than 1, right? So I think it's like one step in front of the other. The first place to go is your local community of entrepreneurs or the gaming community of entrepreneurs, and just have a clear idea of who you're looking for and ask the question. I'm looking for someone to partner with. You don't have to be friends for 10 years or have known each other for, there's a lot of companies that are started by people who just have commonality of interest, and then ask each other the hard questions up front. Who is the boss? How do we split the equity? What's going to happen if we have conflict? How do we resolve conflict? In fact, have a conflict. Just engineer one. So like what you like when it's tough, right?
That's good.
Awesome. I'm very conscious of time. Thank you very much, Fred, for your wonderful insight. That was absolutely brilliant. And I know I speak on behalf of everyone when I say that was incredibly enjoyable, and we're extremely grateful for you joining us this evening.
Pleasure. Thank you for the great questions. And go build, guys. Love you all.
I'm delighted to have Fred join us this evening. Michelangelo from Stride.VC has just dropped a little message in chat. If you are particularly raising and you want to speak to the Stride guys, do drop Michelangelo or Fred an email. It's in the description. We had Footium come out of Encode and raised from them, which is very good to see. And if you want to speak to the Footium guys, they're always available. And I think we have George James and maybe even Jordan on this call at the moment. Everyone, thank you very much. We have many great Encode events coming up. Make sure you stay tuned to the mailing list, the Telegram, the Discord, and the websites. Feel free to email us, message us on Discord at any time if you have any questions or need any assistance. And sorry we didn't get to all of your questions. I think Fred covered everything in such great depth that we had time for slightly fewer than usual, and that's okay. In the meantime, guys, thank you very much. If you need to reach me in particular, feel free to email, tweet, or ping me on Discord. Have a wonderful rest of the day, guys, and see you all very, very soon. Thanks, guys.